Monday, September 16th, 2019, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So with what's happening in Saudi Arabia, particularly in their oil fields over the weekend, I want to talk about this book today, Twilight in the Desert, The Coming Saudi Oil Shock and the World Economy by Matthew Simmons. And I want to talk a little bit about Matthew Simmons, some very interesting things. And I've kind of put two and two together, and I'll give you my opinion of what's happening in the Middle East, and in particular Saudi Arabia, and the fact that they're trying to launch an IPO for Aramco, which is a Saudi state oil company. So before that, of course, I'll look at where the markets are. Of course, yesterday, right on the open, Brent crude was up 20%, WTI was up 10%, and then they stabilized a little bit. Brent came off, and WTI also didn't move much. Right now, Brent crude is at 65.58, up just under 10%. The high was 71.06 yesterday on the open. WTI crude is at 59.70. That's up just under 9%, and the high was 63.59. The stock market was, down about 200 points on the open. It's kind of stabilized. Right now we're down 110, or down 0.4%. Though, so not that bad of a move, considering it's less than 1%. S&P as well is down 14. It is below 3,000 now, though. It's 29.92. The NASDAQ 100 future is down 0.8 or 63 points. The precious metals, of course, have rebounded. It makes you wonder, of course. I'm not going to go into it too much, why silver was smacked down so hard on Friday, right? It makes you wonder if someone knew something, right? And the shorts needed to cover before what happened over the weekend happened, right? That's just my my view, and I'm sure a lot of you are thinking the same. Some of you are calling us conspiracy theorists, right? But anyway, silver is right now 1788, up 45 or 2.5%. The high's been 1801. Gold is at 1505, up $17 or just over 1%. High's been 1512. That's the precious metals. Currencies, we've got sterling down a third, 124.60. Euro virtually unchanged, 110.70. Dollar down 0.25% against the yen at 107.83. Dollar up 0.25% against the Chinese currency, 706.29. We've seen actually bond yields back up a little bit. The 10-year yield is down about 3 basis points at 187. The 2-year is also down 3 at 177. So we've got the Fed meeting starting tomorrow. They announced on Wednesday. Looks like the market is pricing in a 25 cut. Some people think they might cut by 50. We'll have to wait. And we also have to wait for the press conference to see what Chairman Powell says. So I'm not going to go over what happened exactly in Saudi Arabia and the repercussions, right? It was the biggest hit. Oil field was Abqaiq or Abqaiq. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. And so I want to look into Twilight in the Desert, this book by Matthew Simmons. It was published in 2005, and I've read it. I've read it many years ago, and I've had it probably since around that time that he published the book. Before that, though, let's look at who Michael Simmons was. Yes, was, because he passed away in 2010. Because he's no conspiracy theorist. So here we go. Matthew R. Simmons is chairman and chief executive officer of Simmons and Company International, a Houston-based investment bank that specializes in the energy industry. Mr. Simmons serves on the boards of Brown-Forman Corporation, and the Atlantic Council of the United States. He's also a member of the National Petroleum Council and the Council on Foreign Relations. He has an MBA from Harvard University. So, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, Matthew Simmons. So, what's this book about? Twilight in the Desert. So the short summary is that basically Matthew Simmons is accusing the Saudis of overestimating how much oil reserves they really have. And he also talks a lot about the fact that they're using a lot of water to bring up the crude in a lot of their oil fields, which isn't good, which means that the oil is running out, right? So let's see what they say here about this book on the back. Some of the comments. This book is likely to be the most important ever written about oil. The veil of secrecy that has surrounded the world's oil resources must be lifted so the world can plan its future. This magnificently researched book of This magnificently researched book of Matt Simmons may very well have the power to make that happen. Richard Smalley, PhD, Nobel Laureate Chemistry, University Professor Gene and Norman Hackerman, Professor of Chemistry, Professor of Physics, Rice University. What else? Simmons effectively confronts the complacent notion that there are ample oil reserves in Saudi Arabia. Twilight in the Desert should provoke anyone who believes that the recent increase in oil prices reflects either a speculative bubble or short-term supply constraints. It should provoke elected governments that have been complacent about their public lack of concern about energy policy. And it will inevitably provoke producers like Saudi Arabia who believe they can maintain the veil of secrecy over their resources base that the world so strongly depends on. Edward Morris, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for International Energy Policy. Everyone must understand this thesis, whether you agree or not, since it may change life as we know it. Jim Rogers, author of Hot Commodities and Venture Capitalist. So there you go. Those are some of the comments about this book, and these are quite, one was a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. One is a PhD professor at Rice University, and the other one is Jim Rogers. So what about Matthew Simmons? What happened to him? Well, aside from what he's talking, the controversy about Saudi Arabia, probably a lot of you or most of you remember the Deepwater Horizon oil spills, right, in 2010. And Matthew Simmons made some very controversial comments about this. So let's go here on Wikipedia and see what he says. Simmons made several controversial comments and predictions regarding the Deepwater Horizon oil spill and BP's solvency, including talking with Bloomberg TV's Mark Crumpton, Lizzie O'Leary, and Julie Hyman about BP's oil leak in the Gulf of Mexico. Simmons said, and I quote, if it were my family, I'd evacuate now while you still have time. During a June 9th, 2010 interview with Fortune, Simmons claimed BP would have about a month before they claimed Chapter 11, right? Basically, he was blaming BP for the spill. Very controversial. He was all over the news, and I remember this. You can have a look if you Google Matthew Simmons, his Wikipedia, and look at the whole thing. I don't want to go over the whole thing because it's going to take too long, but you get the idea. So this was happening in July 2010, right? What happened to Matthew Simmons? Well, all the controversy was going on in the summer, and then late summer, August 8th, 2010, he dies. So Wikipedia says Simmons was found dead on August 8th, 2010 in his hot tub. An autopsy by State Medical Examiner's Office the next day concluded that he died from accidental drowning with heart disease as a contributing factor. So there you go. That's Matthew Simmons. So what about this oil field, Abqaiq? From what I've read, apparently almost, and there's another one as well, which I forgot the name, but Abqaiq is the major one. It says that it could affect as much as 7 million barrels of oil a day. So this is what he says about Abqaiq on page 31, and I'll read. War delays pursuit of giant fields. World War II brought expansion of Saudi Arabia's oil business to a standstill, though minor exploration continued. When World War II ended, Saudi Arabia was producing about 60,000 barrels of oil per day. Abqaiq, that's the oil field that was attacked by drones over the weekend. Abqaiq was discovered right next to the initial Daman well on the eve of World War II. The find ultimately became one of the most prolific and most reliable producers of all time. Abqaiq, the name means father of a sand flea, turned out to be picture perfect, perhaps the best oil field the world has ever known in terms of size, productivity, and extremely high quality of the crude it produced. A smaller field, much inferior to Abqaiq in reservoir quality, Abu Hadria, was also discovered in 1940. So Abqaiq, very important oil field, and it's been around for almost 80 years, right? So, and you go further into page 185, and he's talking about water injection, which is not good, which is a sign that the oil is running out. So this is page 185, water injection into Abqaiq to maintain oil production, right? It goes, Abqaiq became the first Saudi oil field to be put on water injection to stabilize reservoir pressures. As a secondary benefit, the water injection kept the OWC moving steadily upward. The water injection program began as a test in 1956 and involved 3 wells injecting only 300 barrels per day. By the end of 1961, 230 million barrels of water had been injected into Abqaiq. The program worked well and reservoir pressure stayed constant. Over the years, the volumes injected water steadily grew. Water injection efficiency was partially impeded by the frequent presence of large pores known as vugs, fractures, and other relatively high permeability paths. A permanent water injection program began in 1963. 30 years later, 83 injections wells had been drilled, 28 had been abandoned, and another 6 were turned into observation wells. Many of the abandoned wells suffered from corrosion damage caused by chemically reactive Wazir water. By the early 1990s, the field's pressure support system consisted of 50 gravity-driven water injection wells. These injection wells dump water from the nearby Wazir aquifer without pressurized pumping into the field flanks and underneath Abqaiq's oil-bearing reservoirs. The volume of water injected per well ranges from 2,000 barrels per day to 35,000 barrels per day. Preventive workovers on these injections wells are done every 4 to 6 years. After 3 or 4 workovers are done, the wells are generally abandoned. So there you go. I mean, I won't go further into this, but basically what I think Matthew Simmons was saying, that Abqaiq was probably didn't have as much oil as people think, and they've been injecting it with water since the late 50s, early 60s. So I thought this was really interesting what Matthew Simmons was saying about Abqaiq, and this was about almost 15 years ago. And right now, Aramco is preparing for an IPO, right? And they want to get the most money for their IPO, for investors to invest in their company. Well, you have an attack and the oil field is destroyed, right? And that's the excuse, not the fact that maybe there isn't as much oil there. And there are other reasons why they might want to do this, why this happened. Of course, Iran has been blamed for all of this, and we know that the neocons won a war with Iran, right? But these people, they always kill two birds with one stone, right? So that's my view on it. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and I highly recommend this book. And I highly recommend you look into Matthew Simmons, Matthew R. Simmons on Wikipedia and read a little bit about what he said during that Deepwater Horizon oil spill. You can also follow me on Twitter, Steemit, and on DTube. I wish you all a great day. Take care. Bye.